Welcome to the most courageous people on the face of this planet. That is the people of Ledbetter, Texas. Welcome to the Thicket House again. Um, I think I know what all of us are wanting. What we're all wanting to do is to run down to Soul Cafe and do a group hug and say, man, we miss you guys. We are so anxious to be back together so that we can shake hands and tell each other that we care about one another. And this is way, way short of that. But it is an attempt to kind of stay in touch and to find out how God is with us as we step through these kind of uncertain days. It is that we just don't know what's going to happen. I have an idea, and if it's okay with you, I'm going to see if we can do this. I'm going to take one of my favorite books. We've talked a lot about this book on Wednesday nights at church. It is a little letter written by a real close friend of Jesus, John, and he writes three little letters to some people. And the way we name it in the Bible, it's called First, Second, and Third John. And wow, it's just packed full of these rather mature, thoughtful insights that John had as he reflects upon the life of Jesus. And it adds a dimension to life. And when we get into this book, what you're going to find out is that John is talking about how we get together. On what basis do we form our best communities? In what way do we form our strongest relationships? How do we build that together? And John's going to use that here. So I'm going to start in the very first verse, and we'll just kind of take a little small bite at a time. And I'll tell you what my intention is so you'll know that that's in the background. I am attempting to say to you, we're going to get through this stuff. It may be much tougher than we ever thought. It might be a lot better than we thought. It doesn't make any difference because we're still going to get through it the same way. We're going to get through it by relating to one another, and we're going to get it by putting our faith and trust in God's leadership and His strength in our lives. So I'm going to read the first verse, and that's all, of this little tiny letter, and I want you to all that time say, what is God saying to us about how we're going to get through this time when everyone is talking about coronavirus? Here it is. It says this. What was from the very beginning, what we heard, what we have seen with our eyes, what we beheld, and what our hands have handled concerning the word of life. Well, what a profound way of talking about how we get into relationship. Because John starts by saying, I'm going to tell you about something that's eternal. I want to tell you about something that will last. And what I'm telling you about is what has existed from the very beginning, before anything else was, before anything else had come into existence. I'm going to tell you a truth that has an eternal quality to it. And on that basis, we can begin to relate to one another. Here's what he says, what was from the beginning and what we have heard. That's an interesting statement. And for those of us who maybe have a kind of scientific bent, that is, that we love what science does, we love how science looks at things. For those of us who love Newton and Galileo and Pasteur, and for those of us who love to think that we read about Einstein and understand, and we don't, for those of us who really love science, this is a little bit of a step in an added direction, because science deals with what we can experiment with, what we can test, what we can label. We can stick a piece of litmus paper down into it and read it and say, oh, well, this is acidic or this is alkaline. Those are great, great ways of understanding our world. They have given us cures. What, one of us aren't grateful for Jonah's salt? What, one of us are not indebted to people who have brought us antibiotics that have kept so many people from dying of a simple infection? In other words, I have a great respect and love for people of hard-nosed science. Show us the facts. But John does put a little bit of wrinkle in this and says, I'm going to talk to you about something that you can't know by experiment. I'm going to tell you something that you can only know because it moves toward us. He says, I'm going to tell you about something eternal. We heard it. He spoke to us. I'm going to talk to you about somehow where that which was eternal took shape and had an address and lived in a specific house, in a specific town, at a specific time. I'm going to tell you how the great cosmic truth became a little fractal expression that we could see and we heard. John here is, of course, talking about Jesus. He said, I'm going to tell you something eternal. You can build your life on this because we heard him. We heard him. And not only did we hear him, we saw him with our own eyes. We beheld him. That's John's way of saying we didn't just kind of glance over. We squinted our eyes. We looked at him hard. We got up close to him. We looked right in his eyes. And when we saw who he was, we saw that he was as of the only begotten Son of a Father, and he was just filled up with grace, and he was filled up with reality. He was filled up with truth. And John said, that's what I'm trying to tell you about right now. And it didn't just come to us by scientific experiment. It came to us because God wanted to move toward us. And he came and he spoke to us in Jesus. He came and we were able to get our arms around him and hug him. We've touched the word of life, the great truth. Here's an interesting thing about this first verse that I think gives us great strength as the followers of Jesus, and that is that God is always stepping in our direction. He's always stepping toward us. He's always looking for us. He's always in search for our soul, search for a relationship. Wow, the eternal is looking for us. And all of a sudden we realize, wow, maybe that's the model for all of life. Maybe when we move toward one another in love and compassion and understanding and acceptance, gosh, don't we need a lot of that? Don't we need to be able to look at other people and say, you're okay with me? Oh, I know all that, but you're okay with me. So in this first verse, God gives us an idea of how we're going to form community during this time of crisis. We're going to keep moving toward one another, not quite physically yet. We can't get close enough to hug, but we're going to move emotionally and spiritually. We're going to keep contact. We may have social distance, but we're not going to be isolated, and we're not going to let them tell us we need to isolate. We're going to move toward one another in that kind of love, and that's what God is like. That's what the eternal God is like. Hey, science can do a lot for us, but I want to tell you, faith can open you up to something that is solid and real and true. And that's where we're going to start getting through this crisis together in 1 John. See you soon from the Thicket House.